All right, for the printmaking process, you're going to need a foam plate. I have a actual pre-cut sheet of foam, and it's very flat and even, but you can honestly use a foam plate, like literally a plate that you eat off of. That's totally fine. You're gonna want a pencil. You're gonna want washable markers. It absolutely has to be washable markers, otherwise it will not work. No permanent markers. A sponge of a wet sponge, and you're going to want some sort of heavy white paper. Try to avoid computer paper or things like that. You want something that's a little heavier and thicker, like construction paper, even thicker, nice drawing paper, any of that kind of stuff. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is start using my plate to carve in a pattern. And a pattern is a line or a shape that you repeat over and over and over again. Now to do this, I'm going to draw directly onto my plate, and I'm pushing down with my pencil to create an indentation. And you'll know that you did it right if you rub your fingers over it and you can feel the texture and then the indentation on it. If you don't feel anything, if it feels very smooth, then that means you need to push a little bit harder. You don't want to push so hard that you actually cut through the plate, because that will not be good either. It'll leave lots of weird holes in your project. So instead, you want to make sure you're pushing down hard enough that it makes an indentation, but not so hard that it cuts all the way through it. If that happens, you just keep moving on and try to avoid doing that again. Now, if you're a little bit nervous about creating a pattern right away and you want to practice a little bit, you can, on a scrap paper, come up with some different pattern ideas. Maybe look at some pictures of different patterns to get some ideas of what you think you might want to do. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that when you are carving into a plate, when you push down with your pencil, it's permanent. You're making a carving into the plate, and once I do that, I can't take it back. So I can't say, oh, I've made a mistake, I better just erase it. You can't erase these carvings. So once you make it, it's a permanent mark. So that brings the question of, what if I mess up? So let's say I'm trying to make a bunch of squares, and the first one I do and the next one I do, it's like a weird, goofy shape. It's not at all what I wanted it to be. It kind of looks goofy and weird. What do I do? Well, there's a couple options. One, you can just change your design and say, okay, well, now I'm going to have this weird shape in here every other, and I'll just kind of go with it and just kind of keep repeating that weird shape every time. So that's one solution, and just say, okay, well, that's the way my design is now, and I'm just going to go with it. The other option is to try to fix it by covering it up. So the other thing I could do is, instead, if I made a mistake and that's not what I wanted, and oops, I wanted that to be a circle and it doesn't look like a circle, it looks kind of just like this weird wobble, I can redraw the way I intended for it to be and maybe do something different, like actually color it in. So taking my pencil or pen, you can do this in pen, and actually filling it in completely can actually be kind of interesting and cool too. So again, just sort of changing your design and saying, okay, that's not what I intended, but it's all right. I'm going to just change it and go with something new now. You need to change your design completely. So if you run out of ideas, you can repeat something you already did somewhere else in your picture and just kind of repeat it again. That way you're not with brand new things constantly. So if you can't think of something new, don't worry about it. Just come up with a way of repeating something you already did, but maybe in a little bit of a different or interesting way. All right, once you're done with your entire plate, once again, just sort of check it over with your hand, make sure you can feel texture everywhere. Once you're done with that, now we are going to add some color. And once again, it does need to be a washable marker. It cannot be permanent, because that will not work on this. So what I'm going to do is take whatever colors I feel like taking, and I'm going to start inking up my plate. And what you want to do is color anything that's still flat. So I'm not going to take my marker and try to color inside the lines where I'm trying to actually get inside of them. That's not going to work. What we want to do is color just the surface of it, and try to be a little interesting and careful with your colors. Try to pick colors that you think go together. Try to pick colors that are going to complement each other, and also try to stay inside some of the spaces. So if you have a space like how I have these spaces that I'm able to color inside, think of it like a coloring book, okay? Don't think about it like you're going over your lines again, because you already drew the lines. This time you're going to fill in the empty spaces with color as if it's a coloring book. So just think of it that way. Now, one thing you do need to be careful about is this ink, when it's on a foam plate, the foam plate does not absorb the ink like paper does. So when I draw ink on paper, paper has a quality to it that makes it absorbent, so it absorbs and sucks in the ink. So when I put my finger over it later, I don't get any ink on me. But the ink on the foam plate does not get absorbed. So when I rub my finger over it, I get ink all over my finger because it is not absorbing into the plate. So you do need to be careful about resting your hand in it so that it doesn't get really messy everywhere. So try to be careful. And you're going to fill in the whole thing from top to bottom. You can leave some spots white, like if I want to leave these circles white, I could, but I think it just looks a lot more interesting if I color everything in. So I'm going to color everything in, and then we'll talk about how to make our prints. Now we're going to be making our print. So we're going to take our plate that you've colored in, and as long as you've colored in most of the white, or at least as nicely as you possibly can, we're going to be ready to do the printing part. So we're going to need our white paper that we're going to print on. This paper I used is scrap paper in order to not worry about getting it all off my table. So you can use the opposite side if you did the same as me, or you can get a fresh piece. I'm also going to put my name on this. This is a good idea to do if there's many people working on this and you want to make sure that yours stands out from everyone else's. I'm going to put my name on the back, and then you're going to want your wet sponge. So I'm going to flip my paper over so I have a nice blank side. My name's on the back. I'm going to make sure my plate is nearby and ready to go. Then I'm going to take my wet sponge. Now this part is the tricky part, so if you mess this up, it's okay. If you make a mistake after this printing process, don't worry about it, because this plate is reusable. You can do it over and over again, try different colors, try different combinations, and it should be usable over and over again, just like any other stamp would be. So I'm going to take my sponge, and this part's important. We're going to take the wet sponge and we're going to squeeze out some of the water. We don't want a ton of wet water in our sponge. We want it to be a damp sponge, but not a soaking wet sponge. And I'm going to take my wet, damp sponge, and I'm going to wet the surface of the paper. I'm not pushing down on it so I get a big puddle of water, but I want the whole surface to visibly look damp so that when I see it in the light, it definitely has a sort of glisten to it. As you can see from this, you can see the glistening of the wetness of the paper. And so I'm going to make sure it's all nice and damp. Then I'm going to take my print, and I have to do this quickly so it doesn't dry up on me, and I'm going to flip it over and put it directly on top of the wet surface. And I'm going to use my hands to press and push and try to get an even print. I want to make sure all four corners have been pushed against the wet paper, and I want to make sure that I've gotten my center. So I'm just going to kind of rub the back of my plate, and then when I'm ready, I'm going to peel up one corner and reveal my awesome patterns that have been left behind. And you can see most of the ink has left the plate, and most of it is now on my wet paper. So this is an example of what a good print would look like. You should be able to see your patterns very clearly. Your print should be vibrant and colorful. Now, if it looks very blurry and sloppy, that is a good sign that you used too much water. So if that's the case, I would ask you to take your paper towel and dry off your plate and just recolor it and try again, this time maybe with a little less water. If you barely see any color at all, it could be that you didn't have enough water, so the same thing would be true. Add a little bit more ink, re-wet the paper or get a new paper, and this time try adding a little bit more water. For some people this could take a few tries, and some people get lucky and get it on their first try. But here we have a beautiful print.